guys, welcome back to the Sanditon Chronicles. It's your host, Maureen, and I have to apologize for this late video. Now, usually what I do is I record a week ahead of time, and then I will edit it throughout the week, and I will put it all together, and then I will get it out and schedule it to come out at noon on Sundays, noon Central Time. But I had a lot of things in my way this week. That was what the technical difficulties was. It was the end of summer activities, and I have 3 children who are going back to school, and I am also a coach at that school. So there's been a lot of things, and I wasn't able to record during the week, and the time I had set aside over the weekend also got eaten up. So I am recording the day of putting this out, so I'm recording this on Monday. You are seeing it the same day. I apologize for that. It will not be happening again. The other one next week's is already in the works, so no worries there. This will not be a regular thing. And as you know, I also host and run another podcast as well, Fandom Family Chats. And so we're also doing 2 of those every week. And that's been difficult to get those out on time. So on to the fun stuff. This week we are talking Tom and Sidney Parker. Now I know I've been on kind of a Sidney kick. However, I need you to know that I have all of these episodes scheduled out until next March. So I know what we're talking about every step of the way. And this schedule was made before Theo James made his exit from the show. So, and even if that's the case, even though Theo James is no longer was no longer on the show as Sidney Parker, he will always be Sidney Parker to me, and I think to most of the fandom. I think his character is still important, and I think the dynamics of him with the other characters is also important. And I think that this one specifically between Tom and Sidney is going to have a very real effect on season 2 and 3, because you look at Sidney and Tom, and though Tom is the older brother, he's come to rely very heavily on Sidney. In fact, he says that when Sidney first comes back to town. He says, I rely on your connections. He says that to him. In the very first time we see those two meet. So I think I'm going to go in chronological order, but not chronological order of the episodes. Right, so we know that we see in episode 6, Tom is talking, our basement, when it gets wet outside, we've had a lot of storms. I don't know, that's the other reason that we've had issues, is power outages have been very real. I'm sure that a lot of you, if you're in the States at least, I don't know about abroad, but if you're in the States, you've probably been experiencing storms, at least on the east half. And I know the west half is dealing with fires and stuff, so it's been insane. But when we have storms, our basement gets a little damp, and so it's, I'm going to clear my throat a bit during this episode. So it's going to be a little bit of a comedy of errors. I'm sorry about that. But we are moving me to a different room in the house, so this won't be an issue anymore. Anyway, back to Sidney and Tom. Now, in episode 6, Tom sits down with Charlotte, right? And he has that conversation about how Sidney hasn't always been this way. How Sidney used to be completely different. He used to be lighthearted. He used to be joyful. He used to just, and of course I'm paraphrasing here, and I'm ad-libbing a bit, but you get the general sense that basically Sidney used to enjoy life. And Sidney used to enjoy people. Sidney used to enjoy living life and being a part of community, being a part of friendships, being a part of relationships. But Eliza Campion destroyed all that in him when he had given her himself and was ready to be with her forever. And she's like, no, I found somebody better. Actually, I didn't find somebody better. I just found somebody who's worth more than you, so I'm going to go with them. And that statement right there, worth more than you, is very harmful for a number of reasons, but we already talked about Sidney on his own, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. And so Tom tells us that, he went off at Antigua, and he went off the rails, and Tom had to rescue him and bring him back. Now, I don't think Tom has ever really said, I saved you, you owe me. I don't think he's ever said that. Sorry if it was, I just realized I yelled that into the microphone. So I don't think Tom has ever said that, but I think it's always been implied that, this is what you do in a family, you help. And I think there's that underlying aspect, especially for Sidney, of, well, he helped me out of these situations. How can I deny him? And I think for Tom, there's sort of an underlying issue of, I helped him out of this situation. This is the one time I need his help, so I need him to help me. The difference being, and I do think this is the first time that Tom has ever asked for his help. I genuinely do. I think that Tom probably spent a good chunk of money getting Sidney out of the problems that he had, probably covering debts, I would imagine. And if judging by how that lady at the house knew his name, the madam, that she knew his name and knew who he was and knew what he was looking for, how they hadn't seen him in a while. I'm guessing that gambling and brothels had something to do with the debt that Sidney had racked up in his heartache. And so you have to know that Arthur said he didn't touch a penny of his inheritance. Sounds like Sidney blew through quite a bit of his because Tom had to help him out financially and, physically bring him back. So that means that Tom had to have given some of his money to Sidney. And I think that's where the underlying factor. And of course, this is all, for me, it's implied. I view it as implied. It's never explicitly said. And I haven't read that book that Janice has been telling me to get. I really want to get that book. That, is it what Andrew Davies put out? But it's the companion for the movie. And I don't know if it says it in there. But for me, this just seems like it would be a natural flow of things, especially in that time period, given how family structures worked. It seems like that would have been how it would have worked. That Tom would have given his money. And I think so the underlying thing here is that, Sidney, I wouldn't have to ask you for so much help if I had all of my money. But I gave my money to you to help you out of your issues. And again, I don't think Tom ever actually said that, but I think that Sidney has, have you ever had something where someone helped you out and they never once said you owed them? They never once said, well, if I do this for you, then you have to do this for me. It's never been said, but it's in your head that, they helped me out, so I've got to do this for them. Next, they did something so huge for me. They saved me from something so big. They saved me from financial ruin. Maybe they helped with a mortgage payment. So they ask for anything. I owe it to them to do whatever they ask. Even if I find it hard, I feel like I have to do that to them. Have you ever had that with a situation in your life? And I think that's what Sidney was doing. I think Sidney was of the mindset that I have to help him. Look at what he did for me. I would be in ruins. I would be nothing. I would have nothing. And I would be in a gutter somewhere if it wasn't for my brother. He gave me his money. He gave me his time. He gave me a roof over my head. I owe it to him. And yes, I think that it's been because it's been going on for years now. And I think at first Sidney was probably like, yes, brother, whatever you need. Because, the first time he asks, of course, it's going to be Sidney's reaction of, I'll do whatever you need. And then I think as the years went on, Sidney's like, seriously? Do I have to really keep doing this for you? It's been years now. And I think the reason I think that Tom hasn't said this before is because we don't get the feeling, or at least I don't. Maybe you watch something different than me. I don't know. But I don't get the feeling that Tom has spent extravagantly in his lifetime. I feel like Sanditon has been his extravagance, especially if he was able to help Sidney out financially when he was in trouble. So I think that this is probably the first time that Tom actually asked for help. And even in that, we've discussed in our Tom podcast that he doesn't ask Babington for help. He doesn't ask Lady Susan for help. He doesn't ask anybody that actually has a significant amount of finances to be able to help him out. Babington and Susan, they have connections to the Prince Regent. You don't get connections to the Prince Regent by being broke. It's usually title, land, and money that gives you access to royalty. But Tom doesn't even think of asking them. What he does is continually pull Sidney aside and say, I need you to convince them to stay here, spend money. And I think the reason that is because I get frustrated about that. Like, dang it, Tom, if you had just asked Babington, if you had just reached out to Lady Susan, if you had just done something other than tell Sidney how much you need him and how much you're screwed, then he wouldn't be marrying Eliza and you would have money from Babington, who just married Esther, who's from that town. So I get frustrated, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Tom has probably never really asked anyone for help before. Because, Tom is charismatic. Tom is energetic. Tom is very enthusiastic about this project, but that's because his heart is in this project. His whole life has been poured into this project. He's not a frivolous guy necessarily. I think that by the time we see them, by the time we meet the Parkers, we meet Charlotte even, and she goes to Sanditon, I think it's pretty clear that Tom's already in the red by that time. So we don't get the privilege of seeing how he got to this point, but you can see, and I bring up the scene a lot because it is so well done, and it is one of my favorites, and it's all Chris Marshall, but that scene in episode 3, end of episode 3, where he's staring into the fireplace, and he still and he's calm. He's not manic. He's not effusing over everything. He's not running around like a chicken with his head cut off. He's still and he's calm. But he's also despondent as he stares into the fire. So that gives you a clue into what his character is. His character is someone who is, he's not maniacal. He's not devious. He's not a bad guy. He just got him way over his head and thought he would be able to get more finances with Sidney's connections. And honestly, I think in Tom's head, I think that he's overthinking Sidney's connections. I think that Sidney's connections are Babington and Crow and Georgiana. But I don't think Sidney would ever ask anything of Georgiana in terms of finances or convince her to do that. I don't think he would do that. But I think Tom has this idea that he's a man about town. He's a businessman. So, Sidney, bring in all your business partners. But business partners aren't friends all the time. Business partners are just who you join financially with. But it's not a friendship. It's not someone you can convince to go visit your town, your brother's town. You know, that's not what it is. So I think Tom was probably banking on the fact that Sidney has all these friends of power. He has all these friends of influence. He has all these friends of money. So I'm going to be able to get money because Sidney is going to see to it that I get it. But he didn't realize that while Sidney has a business, he has to keep his businesses running in order to not succumb to the poorhouse. So he's not going to keep those businesses running by harassing his business partners every few minutes about giving money to his brother's town or coming to his brother's town. So that's not an option for Sidney. And I think that that's probably how Tom got to the place he's at, is because he assumed that Sidney must have all these connections. And so if Sidney has those connections, then they're my connections. So I think that Tom has probably not asked for much before until he really needed it. And I think that because this was the original title of the story was the Parker brothers, right? Or it was the three brothers. Or no, it was just The Brothers. That was the name of it. Jane Austen originally titled it The Brothers. Now, I had to point out, because some people have brought this up, that, it should be about the brothers. That's why Sidney has to come back. Not true. Just because you have a working title doesn't mean the story is going to change. Now, I'm a writer, and I've started some things, and I've had a title in my head for this thing. Right, I've had this because the title usually comes first to me, and I think that's how it worked for Jane Austen, because oftentimes that's what happened. Is she had a title for her works, and then as she wrote, the title was changed. Look at Pride and Prejudice; it had a different title originally. Of course, the title wasn't that different than what it is now, but it still was a different title. It was First Impressions, which is different. It became more than just about first impressions. It became about the pride and the prejudice that you can continue to have the longer you know someone. So it became something different altogether. So if we want to stick to the fact that, it's the brothers, that's why Sidney has to return, then you're not thinking about how someone writes. And I think that, granted, she only got to chapter 12, but I think that as she began writing, it started with an idea of these three brothers. Okay, that's where the seed came from, right? That's where the idea came from. But as she wrote, she realized it's bigger than that. It's not just about the brothers anymore. It's about this whole town. It's about how all these people come together in these different ways with these different struggles from these different paths of life. So we cannot hold on to the fact that it was called the Three Brothers. Okay, just want to point that out. But the reason I'm bringing that up, though, is because that's where it started. It was about this town. That's where it came from. The three brothers in the town, or the brothers in the town, and to that point, I think that it was Tom saying, brothers, let's make and create this town together. Brothers, let's come into business together and make this town what we want it to be. So I think that's the other reason that Tom probably leaned on Sidney, is because Sidney was owner. And he says this in episode 2 when they're talking about the town. And I don't remember the exact wording, the exact verbiage, but Sidney says something to Tom like, he says our investment, and he says your investment, Tom. And Tom says, from which you stand to profit richly. And Sidney says, if it succeeds. So right there you get the idea that they are actually in this together, that they are co-owners of this town. I think Arthur is probably included, and maybe even Diana, by default. But Sidney and Tom are obviously the ones doing all the work, because Diana and Arthur, they're caring for each other, right? So I think that's the other reason why Tom got over his head so fast. because, well, I have Sidney as my partner in this town, my financial partner, my co-owner of this town. So not only are his connections my connections, but he's going to want to make it work because it's also his town. But Sidney didn't see it that way ever. Sidney said, yeah, I would profit, but this is not my thing. This is your thing. I'm going to help you out because you're my brother, but this is your thing. So I think that that's probably why he didn't ask Babington, because Sidney's his partner. He doesn't like asking for help. But I think there was also, we talked about the underlying aspect of, I gave him so much, he should be willing to do this for me. I think that's probably the other reason he asked Sidney. I think it was because Sidney was his business partner in creating Sanditon and maintaining Sanditon. And I think that it was also someone he felt he could go to because it was someone that he helped out before. So when things got really dire, I think Tom continued to take advantage of Sidney because, well, I helped him out when he was in need and I'm in need and I'm not done being in need, so he has to keep helping me. And I think that's why he didn't ask Babington or Lady Susan, although I still wish he would have. But they're characters, not real people. And knowing Jane Austen, I think it probably would have ended up that way anyway. Because there's always that hiccup, right? There's always, it's hard and tense, and then it's peace but misunderstanding, and then it's really big bad thing happens, and people are torn apart, but they're realizing the truth of their feelings, the truth of who they are, the truth of what they want, and then they come together in awkwardness and trepidation almost, and they end with a happily ever after. That's how Jane Austen's stories go. So honestly, it probably would have ended the same anyway, because that's just what she does. There needs to be some catch that keeps you hooked and I think that's why we fought so hard for this, because we need to know, does Sanditon survive this? Does Tom make out ahead, or does he completely screw up the whole thing? Does Sidney help him out the way he wants to help him out, or the way he says he will? Does Charlotte have any input here? That's why we fought for it, because we wanted to know how this story ends, because we know that this is just the halfway point. This is just the hiccup on the road. So I think he always would have ended up that way. But I think that if you look at Tom and Sidney, they aren't all that different. I think that when Sidney was feeling desperate, I don't think he actually was desperate. It was just a broken heart, which could make you feel desperate. You feel broken, you feel heartbroken. And in his desperation, or his assumed desperation, he kind of went off the rails. In Tom's desperation, he can't go off the rails. He's got a family to maintain. He's got kids to raise and feed and clothe and a wife to take care of. When he goes off the rails, he is actually desperate for anything, for any money, for any income, for any way out of this that doesn't see his family suffer or him suffer. So they both have extreme reactions. I mean, you look at, in that episode of, I think it was episode 5, in the beginning, when he has the discussion, Tom has the discussion with Stringer, and he's like, you have to show up, you have to get your guys to show up, get them to do what you do, because you're the boss, and I'll do what I do, and that's how it's going to be. But he walks away, and you can tell he's scared, because he knows the truth, and that was all smoke and mirrors for him. I think he used that authority card on Stringer in that moment, because he had no other card to play. I don't think he particularly relished saying, I'm your boss, do what I say. I don't think Tom really enjoyed doing that. I think Tom, you look at episode 1 or episode 2 rather, where he's with Stringer on the bridge. He likes to work together with people. And I think he used that authority card because he realized, I have no answers for you. I'm screwed. I have no money to give you. I have nothing to offer you. If you find out how dire it is, you're going to stop putting this town together. And if you do that, then I am absolutely destitute. So I think he pulled that card because he had to. But he's afraid. And you can see in that moment how desperate he is. And then he goes and he does something reckless, like buying a really expensive necklace for his wife. Like, why? You don't have any money. But he does it in a desperate attempt to show, no, we're fine. Look how fine we are. I just bought this beautiful necklace for my wife. And so they both react very, very strongly to desperation. They both react very, very strongly to having those moments where you feel out of control. And so they are very similar. But they also, both of them, put family above all else. And I know Tom has to think about his wife and his kids as his family that he puts above all else, even above Sidney and Arthur and Diana. But I'm willing to bet that before, and we can see that by how he saved Sidney. Arthur and Diana never needed saving. But he went and he saved Sidney. So before he had all these kids, before he had this wife, it was his brothers and his sister who were his top priority. That's what it is for Sidney now. Only Sidney also has the added burden of, okay, my brothers, my sister-in-law, my nieces, my nephews. So he's got this wider net now where he understands that, excuse me, he understands that if it comes down to him or that family, he's going to choose that family, even if it means his own misery. Because that's what family does. Family sticks together. Family does for each other. And I think that's the concept that they've always had together. And so Sidney still maintains that. Now, I don't think Tom takes advantage of that. I know people don't like Tom. Now, if you're in our Facebook group, which, by the way, our Facebook group is the Sanditon Chronicles, Sanditon Family Fan Club. We're doing an elimination game in there right now. Might have actually just finished. But it was choosing your least favorite character of 9, and the one last standing was the winner, right? And Tom was on the chopping block for quite a few times before he got booted off. So I know that people don't exactly like Tom. I don't understand that, because I think that Tom is. I think the fandom kind of holds Tom responsible for Sidney marrying Eliza. But again, if you look at the perspective I just put it in, that for Sidney, family is more important than anything else. And his family includes marrying those kids. Tom is not the reason he did this. In fact, look at Tom and Sidney when they first go to the fire. He doesn't say, brother, I need your help. He doesn't say, the day after. He doesn't say, brother, I need your help. Brother, help me out. Brother, give me money. Brother, find me money. He doesn't say that. He says, I'm ruined. There's nothing any of you can do for me. That's it. I'm done. Arthur says, well, you can have my inheritance. And he says, that is very kind of you, brother, but it won't help. Obviously, he says more than that. He says, but all of our inheritance combined would be but a drop in the bucket to what I owe. I think that's how he words it. But he didn't ask them. He didn't ask them for help. In fact, when Lady Denham was haranguing him haranguing Tom over not buying insurance, which so stupid, so stupid. Ugh. He should have done that. I understand why he didn't, because he was running out of money and he prioritized paying his men over paying for the insurance of the work, which is incredibly risky and obviously a bad idea in the end, as we saw. But I think his mind went to, I either pay my men so they keep working, or I put it all into insurance so that if the building ever does get finished, it'll be insured if something happens to it. But the building's never going to be finished if the workers aren't paid. And so I think he prioritized that, but then he ran out of money anyway. So when Lady Denham is haranguing him in Trafalgar House in episode 8, and she calls him a despicable man, she's attacking him, right? Sidney has no reason to be there. Neither does Charlotte, for that matter, but Sidney has no reason to be there. Sidney took it upon him, and Tom just sat there and he took it. Tom told his brothers after the fire, thank you for wanting to help, but there's nothing you can do. I'm done. My family's ruined, and I'm done. This is it. This is the end of the line for me. And then when Lady Denham is attacking him, he sits there and he takes it. He stands up taller, takes a deep breath, but he just lets the hits come in because he realizes, yeah, I've done this. I have screwed this up. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't say, Lady Denham, you're wrong. He takes it because he understands you're right. I gambled with your money in a way that was really reckless. I gambled with lives in a way that was really reckless. Wasn't my intention. Didn't want to, but I did it. And Sidney is the one who steps up and says, give us a week's grace. A week? Really? A week? A week to find that much money? You couldn't have said, give us a month, give us 2 weeks. But no, Sidney is the one who stepped in. And Sidney took control of the situation. And Sidney put himself up on a platter as sacrifice. Tom didn't ask him to do that. This is the one time Tom didn't ask him to do anything. So we can blame Tom for this all we want. And of course we can put it down to he never got insurance. But there is a reason he chose not to get insurance. It was reckless. It was stupid. But he chose getting the work done over the insurance because if the work's not done, then there's nothing to insure anyway. And I think that's probably how he was thinking about it. And he says, there was so many demands on my capital. And then Sidney says, so you took the risk? You took a gamble? And so he understands it was a gamble. And he probably knew when he was doing it. It's probably part of the reason he was so manic about getting the work done. Because he knew if he could get the work done, not only would money flow into the town, but as money flow into the town, he would be able to buy the insurance for the work that is now completed. So there's so many reasons for him to be a desperate man. In so many ways, I think that I don't think Sidney understands all these things very much. I think what Sidney really understands with Tom, at least until the end, is family obligation and family loyalty. I think that's what he understands. I don't think and I think that's what Charlotte calls him out on when she says, you don't help your brother. And he says, I do what I can for Tom. And she says, do you? I think that's what she's meaning. Is that anyone who looks closely at Tom, or even not even closely, you just look at him for a minute, you can see he's a desperate man who's floundering, there's a reason his entire life, every moment of his day is consumed with earning money for Sanditon. There is a reason he is consumed with that. It's because he's desperate to get money in. And you don't have to be incredibly intelligent or a genius to figure that out. You don't. And I think what Charlotte was saying to Sidney in that moment is, yeah, you try to find money, but you're miserable while doing it. You don't want to do it. You let him know you don't want to do it, which just adds to the burdens he already has. But you can see your brother is floundering. You can see your brother is drowning quickly. Or maybe the better analogy is he's in quicksand. And instead of just going to him and helping him out, you're hemming and hawing and complaining about how much work you have to do. I think that was kind of what she was saying to him. Granted, Tom was starting to annoy me with how many times he asked Sidney for something. But I mean, that's just because it would annoy anybody. No one wants to be someone's personal bank. And I think that goes for Sidney too. He didn't want that position. He didn't want to hold that title. And so what Sidney understood was, he is my brother. I had to do right by my brother. But I think Sidney always saw, because of that underlying ideology of, he saved me, I have to save him. Because of that, I think there's sort of a mentality of, yeah, but he just paid the one-time thing, and then he was done. I can't keep doing this forever. He only helped me for so long, I can only help him for so long. I think that was partly Sidney's mentality. So it got to a certain point, and he's saying, I can't do this for you anymore, Tom. I'm done. So he does understand the family loyalty, but that the reason that only goes so far is because he's not looking at Tom's situation as a whole. He's not seeing how deeply he's struggling. He's not seeing why he's struggling. In fact, how many times did Sidney ask him, why are you struggling? Sidney's a smart guy. Sidney is a man of business. He's earned his fortune back by I don't know if the companion book says this, but we don't really know, other than previously in the sugar trade, but he got out of that. We don't really know what he does. We just know that he's a man about town. He's a man of business. So he built his fortunes back up by the businesses he started or continued in London. But he built himself back up. So he's a smart guy. He knows business, and you have to be successful in business and to build your business up to the level that he was living, to the level that he had in comfort. You have to be able to read people at least a little bit. You got to know where those smart investments are and where they're not. He had to have seen that Tom was, 1, acting a little bit different, 2, really desperate, and 3, that Tom never relented on asking for the same thing over and over and over again. Don't you think at one point Sidney could have said, Tom, are you out of money? How much money do you need? What do you not have paid for? What is going on? Why do you need this money so badly, so much right now? Don't you have anything left? He could have asked any one of those questions, but he didn't. In fact, Tom is the one who said, Sidney, I'm hemorrhaging money. He offered that to Sidney when I think it was because Tom really felt Sidney was done. Like he wasn't going to help unless Tom gave him a reason. And you'll notice when Tom gave him that reason and said, I'm hemorrhaging money, I can barely afford to pay my laborers, I'm going to run out of money soon, and I'm desperate for it. Then Sidney was like, Okay, how much do you need? Why didn't you ask? Why didn't you ask him beforehand? How much money do you need? Are you in trouble? What have you not had paid? Why are you out of money already? So he could have asked those questions, but he didn't. And I think it's because Sidney was so caught up in, I don't think he was caught up in himself necessarily, because he still had that familial loyalty. Even when Charlotte was up on that balcony with him and in episode 1, and he lost his temper on her because of the things she said, he knew she was right. Again, anyone could look at them for about a half a second and figure those things out. He knew she was right. But it was his sense of loyalty and defense of his family that caused him to lose his temper and react in that way. So Sidney does understand that clearly. He understands the idea of standing by your family and helping them through there. But I think that he has shut himself off from feeling anything, that it's almost like he is unable to by design to pick up on what Tom is feeling and what Tom is going through. And you can kind of see that in episode 3, after she talks to him and she says, you don't help him out. You see when they're sitting in front of the fireplace in episode 3 and he's standing with Tom and he starts to say, Tom, I can't. And then he pauses. And he says, well, how much do you need? And once he is allowing himself to be opened up again, and that has to do largely with Charlotte showing him that he is, not only is he worthy of it, and I think that's the biggest thing probably, is that he needed to know he was worth it to somebody. And Eliza basically said, I found someone who's more worthy than you, who is worth more. So as Charlotte started to make Sidney feel that, and remember for Charlotte, she didn't even think she loved him until episode 6. And then she was like, no way, I don't love him, no way. So this wasn't like, she knew that she was attracted to him, certainly. She knew she felt something for him. But she thought it was just anger and frustration. And I think that it was hard for her to pick up on the kinder feelings she had for him. Not that she felt unkind towards him. I'm making a mess of saying this here. But you look at episode 3 again when they're on the beach. And she throws back at him the things that he said to her. I think that she is just more guarded with him. She knows that he has made her angry and made her feel bad about herself. And she's kind of keeping it close to the vest to guard herself. Not shutting the door, just keeping close to the vest. And that's the difference between Sidney and Charlotte, is that Charlotte doesn't close the door on those feelings or the possibility of those feelings. She just stays guarded and watchful. Sidney is like, nope, never again, and slams the door. And I think that has kind of clouded how he works with Tom. I think that if you would pay more attention, he would see that Tom needs him in more ways than Sidney realizes. And so we see that as time goes on, Sidney becomes softer towards Tom. Sidney is more willing to do what Tom asks of him the longer he knows Charlotte, because he is starting to soften. He's starting to see that, my brother does need me. It shouldn't just be because he's my family, I have to. But my brother does need me, and I love my brother. So I should help more. And I think Tom is so clouded with desperation that he can't see what he's asking of his brother, the monumental things he's putting on his brother's shoulders. I mean, the amount of money he asks for from Sidney on a regular basis is a lot of money. And there's not really a way that you can put that on someone's shoulders and not expect them to be overwhelmed by it. Because as desperate as Tom is to get that money, he's kind of putting that on Sidney and almost saying, well, it's your fault I'm so desperate because you haven't taken care of this yet. So he's putting it on his shoulders. And so, while I think that these two boys, men, whatever, brothers, I think that they do love each other a great deal. I think that they would do anything for the other one, as evidenced by what Sidney does in the end, right? When he says, give us a week, and then he's the one who leaves. He's the one who goes to look for the money. Why didn't Tom go with him? Why didn't Tom try to make his face seen as the face of Sanditon and try to get people to submit to him? But he doesn't. Sidney goes out, and Sidney goes to find the money. Sidney goes to try to take care of things because that has been his role. And I think that he has this idea that he's a better businessman than Tom, which might be true. But I think for the amount of money that they're requesting, they probably should have divided and conquered a little bit. But I mean, Tom or Sidney clearly gives of every ounce of his own happiness to help his brother. It clearly broke him to say yes to Eliza. Well, actually, not just to say yes to Eliza, but ask Eliza to marry him and turn away Charlotte. Clearly that broke him. As much as it broke Charlotte, it broke him. And I know that now the fandom is divided on that. They weren't before. Well, I think there might have been a little bit of division, but I think the real division came after Theo James backed out of the project. Well, he didn't even back out. He just said he wasn't returning to the project. And I know that people are like, well, he left her. Why do we want her to be with someone who left her? He didn't leave her because he felt like it. He didn't leave her because he was a bad guy. He didn't leave her because she wasn't worthy. He was fully aware that of the two women, Charlotte was the one more worth his time. Charlotte was the one who was more worthy in terms of personality, in terms of care, in terms of just overall being a human. Eliza was the less worthy of the two. Sidney was very much aware of that. But the loyalty he had to his brother and his family, and the level of burden that he felt to save his family, made it so that Sidney was the last on the totem pole. Charlotte was just above Sidney, but still at the bottom. Because he couldn't care about anybody else but his family. He couldn't put his happiness or anyone else's happiness on the table until he knew that his brother was safe, until he knew that his nieces and his nephews and his sister-in-law were safe. He couldn't do that because family loyalty is everything. Because working, or at least allowing your family to keep working and making a living, meant more than anything else did. Because family is never gone. They're there no matter what. And I think as Sidney has seen, clearly relationships don't always have to last. Eliza left him. And I think he's so jaded by that he has put, almost mistakenly, I mean, yes, I want Charlotte and Sidney together. No, I did not want him to get engaged to Eliza Campion. Yes, I think there were other avenues. I think Sidney could have asked Babington or Lady Susan. There's a chance that Babington was on his honeymoon, traveling abroad or something. There's a very real chance of that, so maybe he wasn't around to ask. But if I had to choose between him marrying Charlotte and being happily ever after, or marrying someone with money to save Mary and those kids, and yes, Tom, I would choose saving Mary and those kids and Tom. And I think Sidney saw that too. I think Sidney saw that he could not prioritize just himself when so many others were at stake if he didn't. I think those names of his nieces and nephews, and even Mary and Tom's name, were very heavy on his mind when choosing Eliza or Charlotte. And he was very much aware that if he did not find that money quickly, all those names would be gone. No, Babington wasn't on his honeymoon because he got married after Sidney. After Sidney got engaged to Eliza. That being said, though, maybe he felt, I can't burden Babington when he's getting married. He's preparing for his wedding. He's preparing for his honeymoon. I can't ask him to do this and oversee this because then, whatever. He might be waylaid. So I think that there's just that urgency. And I think that, he didn't want to marry Eliza. He didn't want to hurt Charlotte. But he literally saw no other way out. And he even says at one point, he says, if there were any other way at all, believe me, I wouldn't have done it. Of course, he doesn't say, I wouldn't have done it. He just says, if there was any other way, and then stops talking. So, I mean, obviously Charlotte is as heartbroken as him. And that's one thing that has bugged me about Tom's relationship with Sidney. And this is something that when I interviewed Kate Ashfield, I had asked her about it. And I've tried to pause it right there after he tells them, I'm marrying Eliza and the town is saved, I've tried to pause it to see what Mary Parker's face looked like, but from half of her face is cut out of frame. So it's hard to see what her facial expression is or how sad she is. But I know that when I asked her about that, she had said that she probably is sad for her friend and she probably is sad for Sidney, but her main concern is her family. And her family, yes, that is Sidney, but her family is also her children and her husband and her. And so while she would probably be grieving for Charlotte and Sidney and their loss and their sadness at that loss, there was also a bit of her that had to rejoice that her children were going to have a roof over their heads. Her children were going to continue being fed and clothed. There was that level of relief that couldn't be denied even when looking at your friend who was clearly about to be heartbroken. But Tom, on the other hand, Tom had to have known how Sidney felt about Charlotte. I mean, yeah, he was pretty involved in his own world, but you have to think that Mary has said some things to him about this. Especially after the regatta, when he comes in episode 7, when he comes back from London and they're getting along and they're divulging information to each other and they're talking, they're having conversation, they're kind of going back to where they used to be. And Sidney is clearly falling for Charlotte, and Charlotte is clearly falling for him. You have to imagine that even if it's something along the lines of, "Oh, you're so oblivious, Tom," but then telling him. So I have to think that she had mentioned something to Tom. Maybe Tom did something where he did in episode 4 when Mary says something to him at the breakfast table, and he's like, "Yes, yes, dear," and then he stops. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, what?" So he could have done that, maybe. But at that point, before the fire, Tom was walking on the clouds. Everything was right with the world. Everything was going his way. He wasn't worried. At the final dance at the ball, he did want Sidney to continue introducing himself to people who will live there, people who want to go there, because I think he realized that Sidney was better at talking numbers than Tom was. And I think Tom recognized that. So, there is a chance that he wasn't really paying attention. However, it is kind of sad that in Tom's relief, he just completely ignored the look on Sidney's face. Because even if you watch that scene, while Sidney doesn't directly look right at Tom and give him puppy dog eyes, he does look unhappy. He stares at the ground at one point he just kind of smiles at the ground. Of course, maybe he did before then, but with the amount of heartbreak he was feeling and the way that we've watched Theo James play Sidney's character, he couldn't have been effusing with joy at it, And so Tom completely disregarding how his brother might be feeling about this is really sad. And I know that part of it is because Tom even says to Eliza, hey, maybe they'll end up together after all. After he was been in love with her for so long, he's been heartbroken about this. So yay, restoration. And this is as far as Tom's mind goes. But Tom is also more of the mindset of, hey, it's a benefit to all if you do this. And I think he's more practical about marriage than Sidney is. I think that he's not with his own wife. But I think that he has kind of that attitude. And you see that at the regatta when he talks about how she's very wealthy now. And of course she'd be a great match. Why wouldn't you want to be with her? So money does play into that for Tom. He's more practical than Sidney is. So I think he wouldn't see a problem with it. And if you weren't taking into account Sidney's facial expression or how down he seemed, yeah, I can get that Tom wouldn't have even known. Because, well, of course you're going to marry her. You love her. You did love her. She's got money. She's available. You're available. But if Tom would have taken a second to look at Sidney and to see the expression on his brother's face, to at least ask the question, brother, what's wrong? Don't you love her? Aren't you excited to marry her? Even if you would have just asked that, that's one thing that always kind of made me sad. And I get the relief aspect of my children are going to be fed and clothed now. My children are going to keep this roof over their head. I get the relief of that. I honestly do. I mean, I have 3 kids of my own. I understand what a parent might feel at hearing those salvation words. It is just sad that in those moments, Sidney was not better cared for by his brother about this. If that makes any sense. I don't know. But I think that both Sidney and Tom rely heavily on each other. I really do. I think that probably Sidney always had, as Tom's, the older brother. I have to sneeze. 1 second. I'm so sorry. I think that, especially Tom being the older brother, certainly when they were younger, Sidney has relied on him a lot. And we've talked about the death of their parents before. And I really do think that their dad died in some traumatic way. And maybe even their mom as well. Just going off of comments that the brothers have said in the past and the way they treat the town. So I have to imagine that Tom was a sort of pseudo-dad. So I think Sidney really relied heavily on him. As evidenced by when he went off the rails, Tom is the one who knew about it. Tom is the one who went to save him. And I think now it's reversed to where Tom might even think a little bit, well, Sidney, you don't have anyone to pay for. You just have you. So I have mouths to feed. You don't. That could have been Tom too, but Tom, for whatever reason, Tom relies on Sidney very much now too. And even Arthur to some extent, like he feels that family obligation. It's a familial thing. This idea of loyalty, this idea of care at whatever cost is something that I think both Tom and Sidney have. Both of them do. And so I think that they're both men who have been trained to deal with brokenness and despair in not necessarily healthy ways. But they also know how to be there for each other in the midst of that despair. And so I think that Tom and Sidney have a really, really close relationship, but not one that either of them looks too far into. Because as much as we can say, Tom, you couldn't even see that Sidney was sad. In the beginning, Sidney wasn't really looking at how desperate Tom was either. So I think that while I think they love each other deeply, would do anything for the other one, anytime the other one's in trouble, I think they have different ideas of what trouble is. I think they have different ideas of what heartbreak is. I think they have different ideas of what's right and what's wrong is in terms of, well, it's right for you to be with Eliza because she has money. She's available. You're available. You used to love her. What's wrong with that? Whereas Sidney has the mindset of, I don't love her. I love this person, even though she doesn't have the money Eliza does, even though, she isn't someone I used to have a relationship with. I still love this other woman. So I think their ideas are different. I think they have very different strategies. I think they have very different personalities. I think they have very different, and I think that's where the disconnect comes, is because they have very different priorities. And they have very different ideas of what's more important in terms of, a husband-wife relationship, ideas of what's more important. But you can see through all of that, what I really love about how they did those characters is you can truly, truly see in that how much they both deeply love and admire each other. And how much they really are there for each other. I love that. I love seeing how close they get. I love seeing how much they kind of fight for each other, how much they just desire to help their other brother out. And when Tom is happy, the smile that Sidney gets just knowing he's happy is great. And when they are walking along the banks in the regatta, and Sidney and Arthur and Tom are all walking there talking, you can tell that Tom's heart is for his brother to be happy, but he just has a different idea of what would make him happy. That's the issue. It's the only issue. They both have different ideas of what would make each happy. And so I think Tom really does desire Sidney's happiness. And I think it's very evidently clear that over happiness, Sidney desires more than anything the health of that family, the well-being of that family. And I think we could break down every interaction, but I think every interaction is almost the same. Tom desperate, Sidney partially aloof, and we see that softening grow. But I think we've talked about that softening pretty extensively. So I think that on that note, we're going to end. And I'm so sorry this podcast is coming out so late. Even on Monday, it's going to come out late. So you guys will not be seeing this until tonight. And I apologize about that. Next week, it will be out on Sunday at noon Central Standard Time. And I'm going to try to do my best to make sure this doesn't happen again. So let us know. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you agree with our assessment of Sidney. And again, I want to let you know that I am getting your emails. And I am getting your responses on YouTube, and I'm trying to comment and respond to all the ones on YouTube that I see come in. And I haven't responded to the email ones yet, but I am going to do it, I promise. My issue is that when I see the emails pop up on my phone, I don't reply on my phone because I don't like typing on a tiny little phone. I like to be at a computer. So I will be responding to those, and I love hearing every single thing you have to say, even if it's a critique, even if it's, well, could you do this, should you do this? And I forget the name of the person who had asked. I should probably look it up while I say this. But someone had asked if we are going to discuss Esther and Edward. And I think that you can tell by now that Esther is my gal. I love Esther. She is one of my favorite people. So that is absolutely, I'm looking to see who it is. That is absolutely something we're going to do. So I want you to be assured of that. And I want you to know that that is coming up. Again, I had this all scheduled out for the next year. So if this is something that you want to be a part of, if this is something, I'm not going to keep looking through those emails. If this is something that you want to sit down and chat with me about, I would love to sit down and chat with you. I would love to have a conversation with you about this. And that's all it would be. If I interview you, it's not really interviewing. It's like what Janice and I do when she comes on and hosts with me. It's just a conversation about Sanditon. And on those days when you would be coming on, stepping in to discuss it, we would just have a conversation about Sanditon. It wouldn't even have to be a specific subject. It would just be, what do you think? What do you like most? What do you like least? That sort of thing. And on to that point, because we aren't doing interviews at the moment, I'm still in talks with their publicity team. We are going to, at the end of our recaps, that's going to become subjects, because you know how we do a recap, and then we go into a character spotlight, and then we go into a character relationship, and then the fourth week was reserved for interviews. And we're hoping to get those back soon. But after our 8 recaps, next week is going to be episode 5 recap, or episode 6 recap. So, we only have 3 left to do. Once that's done, we need you to ask, or we need you to give us the topics you want, because we won't have recaps to do anymore. How sad is that? And by that time, Sanditon 2 will not be out yet. So, start giving us your ideas. You can email us at the.sanditonchronicles@gmail.com and let us know what things you would like to see us talk about in that week that's going to replace recaps. Or if you want to be a part of this, again, reach out to me through the email. You can reach out on our Facebook group of The Sanditon Chronicles, Sanditon Family Fan Club. You can find me on Instagram at the.sanditon.chronicles, or just search The Sanditon Chronicles. You can find me on Twitter at the Twitter handle is at @SanditonThe. Or you can just search The Sanditon Chronicles. It'll all come up. Reach me on any one of those platforms. Let me know if you want to be involved, how you want to be involved. Continue to send in your thoughts of the episodes, and I love hearing what you think about the show. And we are so thankful for you. And just remember to rate and subscribe if you're able to, because the more you like, the more downloads we get, the more people we have watching, the better content we can bring you, and the more valid we are seen. So continue to do that. Continue to listen and share with your friends, and tell everyone you know who loves Sanditon about this podcast. We'd love to have them too. On that note, we'll see you in a week. Bye, guys.